Welcome, everybody, to Conscious Cafe Global. My name is Gina Lazenby, and it's a delight for me tonight to host a really interesting conversation, the Barefoot Survival Guide, with the Barefoot Mediator, Jane Gunn, who is a global specialist in this area, particularly conflict resolution. She is the president of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. She's in the Legal 500 Hall of Fame. And she has worked in many situations, helping leaders in high stakes situations, handling conflict. And, with the world is what it is now, I just know that she's in huge demand. She is the author of two books. One is The Authority Guide to Conflict Resolution, and the other, intriguingly named, The Mole and the Mountain. And she has a passion for bringing people together and creating communities of what she calls resolutionaries. So I'm really interested to hear more about this, because what she wants to do, and we'll hear about this tonight, is support people as leaders in their communities, being able to inspire people and thrive in these really uncertain times. And of course, in uncertain times, it goes without saying, we've timed this conversation perfectly well, haven't we, Jane, with what happened in Spain yesterday when the whole country going without power. So I think that leads us into a very interesting conversation. So Jane, welcome, and we'll give you a Conscious Cafe welcome.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
You with our hands.
Oh, that's nice. I like that. Okay, well, thank you very much, Gina, and thank you, Judy, for inviting me, and welcome, everybody. I wanted to ask you to start with, how was your journey? And I know we're all online, but I really mean, how was your journey to this point? What has brought you to this point? We've all had a lifetime's journey, however long our lives have been so far, that's got us to this point. Lots of experiences and wisdom gained. And all of us have come together, whatever has brought us together to tonight, and those who will join us in watching the recording. There's something special about that. And as Gina says, there's a very special topic. We've been through many challenging times in the last 5 years, and we're beginning to realize that not only are we having to recover from a pandemic, but we are in what I like to call a cycle of crises. Many people talk about this, but there do seem to be crisis after crisis, or the threat of crisis. And so we're constantly thinking about, what do we do? How do we plan? And some of that we're going to look at this evening. So I want to leave you, it's going to be an interactive session. So I will be popping you into breakout rooms for discussion from time to time. And I want to leave you with a really clear framework that you can help you think through and make decisions in times of crisis, something to come back to that will help you have discussions and make decisions. So that's the plan for this evening. So I'd like you to start just by popping in the chat box, if you will, just what are some of the crises that you see or anticipate at the moment. As Judy and Gina have said, yes, there has been a power outage that's impacted a number of countries. So there's one thing, but what else do you see, or what else do you anticipate that may impact us? And as we go through the material this evening, I'd like you to be thinking on 3 different levels. How might things impact you as an individual? How might they impact you in any group that you belong to? That might be your family group, your community, or even a business that you are part of. And how do you think it's going to impact us all as a global society there? So there's 3 different levels on which we are being impacted and may be impacted. So the first question is, what crisis do you see, and what crisis do you anticipate right now? And let's have a look what answers you come up with. I'm also going to start sharing my slides while you think about those questions. Dementia in aged parents. Yes, Gina, that is a challenge that many of us still have, is aged parents to deal with, and helping them whilst we're trying to do it. Instability in the financial system. Yes. Wow, lots more. Grandma in hospital. Yes. Dehydration, desertification, food supply. Yes, I agree. Food shortages. Yes. Knife crime, climate change and lack of water, corruption and unstable government. Old systems need neighborhood conflict. I mean, there's so many things, aren't there? When we begin to think, 5 years ago, we were worried about what a pandemic was and what impact that would have on us. Now we seem to have, as I say, a cycle of crisis. What's the impact on families right now? I'm a mother and a grandmother. I was just chatting with Judy and Gina before we came on. So I've got 4 little granddaughters. I'm very concerned and thoughtful about what the future is going to look like for them too, and how we can think about our future generations. I think that's really important. How can we look to the future and what kind of future we want to create? So thank you for those answers. So yes, I've called this Barefoot Survival. I am barefoot this evening. It is so warm. I have not got my shoes on, and that is how I got the nickname Barefoot Mediator. Because during the time we were forced into lockdown, I was doing my work as a mediator with no shoes on, and it was a joke, but it stuck. But then when I thought about it, I thought, well, what is a barefoot mediator? And for me, the term barefoot mediator is aligned with the term barefoot doctors. So the barefoot doctors were kind of paramedics, I believe, who were originated in China when people couldn't get to the hospitals who lived in rural areas, and so they were called the barefoot doctors. For me, barefoot mediators are people who don't want to train as a commercial mediator like me, but they do want to understand the skills and the tools and the mindset in particular that can help them to survive and thrive in times like this. And they are what I call resolutionaries. And as Gina said, it is my wish to create a tribe and a whole movement of people who are willing to practice these skills on a day-to-day basis in their communities. So we'll come back to that later. There we go, the death throes of a system, time to move on. But that's going to be interesting, isn't it? So today we'll explore 3 or 4 sections, really. What does it take to anticipate, to analyze and adapt to change and crisis? How do we reach a level of clarity about what's actually going on? How do we think clearly in times of crisis? And how do we actually journey forward with that clarity and with clear values and action? Thank you, Louise, for that. Losing close friends due to ill health, age. One thing just to tell you about how I got into the work I do, and this is a true story. I was in my local library looking for a recipe book, and a hardback book fell off the top shelf and hit me on the head. And this is a true story. And it wasn't a recipe book. I looked at the book. It was a book called Love, Medicine and Miracles by Dr. Bernie Siegel. Some of you may have come across Dr. Bernie Siegel. He's now retired, but he was a cancer doctor, primarily a pediatric cancer doctor. And Dr. Bernie Siegel was frustrated with his job even back then in the 1970s as a doctor, saying he was fed up with the protocols and people being on a conveyor belt and having to look only at their symptoms and their disease. And he wanted to be more holistic, and he wanted to look below the surface to see what was really going on, what were the needs, concerns, hopes, fears of people. I thought then, and I think very much now, that this is the answer to have a more holistic approach to life, in fact, to looking at all problems. And that was why I became a mediator, to adapt that approach. So Love, Medicine, Miracles by Dr. Bernie Siegel is a book I would recommend to all. Let's get my slides to move. They often don't move when you want them to. Here we go. So this is a picture of me when I started out on my journey. Don't look anything like that today, but that was the beginning of my journey as a lawyer, which I started out as and have then become a mediator. And that's the first question that we've just answered. So it's important to think when we're in a time of crisis how something is impacting, also may impact us on various different levels. And those levels are, how is it going to impact us physically? We often think about that. You know, how does the power going down impact us? We might be cold. We might not be able to cook food. There are various things about the recent crisis we've just talked about, but also how might it impact us financially? How might things impact us mentally? And then how might things impact us spiritually as well? So this is the map of experience. This is the map we're going to use this evening, which is going to help us to navigate. And I'm going to use different sections of the map to help you think through how to be resilient, how to manage in times of crisis. So you may see a number of icons on the map, and the first one is the fallen oak. Sometimes when we're plunged into a state of crisis, we feel uprooted. Many of us in the last 5 years have felt that life has changed completely and we're never going to go back to how life was before. So the fallen oak represents this time of being uprooted. Next, the wrong shoes. You may recognize the wrong shoes. Have we got the right mindset? Have we got the right people around us? Do we have the right guides? Sometimes we haven't got the right equipment or the right mindset to take us through the challenges that we're facing. Then baggage. All of us, every one of us is carrying our own baggage, our own expectations, our own experiences, things that have happened to us before, cultures that we've been brought up in, the family we've been brought up in, just being conscious of the baggage we carry, the baggage other people carry, the baggage the world as a whole is carrying at the moment is an important one. And then characters and choices. You'll see on the map that there are many characters, and in particular, the snake at the crossroads are the people, are the situations that are trying to distract you and disconnect you from the right choices that you might make in a crisis. And I'm going to take you through the process that I use in mediation, but this process can be used for any decision, any dialogue, and so on. And so what we're going to look at is this in 4 different sections. So we're going to look at what's actually happening now, what is the problem or issue that concerns us or that might concern us when a crisis arises. Then explore more deeply. This is the stage that most of my clients wish to avoid. They don't like to do the deep exploration. They'd rather somebody else came up and told them, here's your problem and here's your solution. And this is one of the challenges that we do face at the moment in society, is that many of us are looking for someone else to come to our rescue and tell us what the answer is, when in fact it's up to us to make that decision. What are some options? What are the solutions? But how do we decide on the way forward? What are our criteria? What are our values? And then the walking forward. How do we make a commitment to walk forward? And what actions should we be taking? So this is the framework that I want to leave you with, and the one we're going to be looking through today. There are 2 key principles that are key to my work. One is self-determination. It's really important that we as individuals, that we as groups, and that we as a society are making our own decisions, that we take back control, that we make our own decisions according to what's right for us. And fully informed consent. And it may seem that those things sound like relevant to medical processes, but they are in fact relevant to all decision making, that when you make a decision, you have all the information that you need, you've gathered all the information, you've done this thinking process, this deep thinking, and that you're making your own decision. And those are very key principles to me in my work. So here is the process together. We're going to use the compass, we're going to use the map as a guide or a navigational guide to show us the landscape through which we're traveling, and understand that we can use this process to help us decide on a decision, a direction, a dispute resolution, dialogue, and so on. So that's the process we're going to go through. And this is my mantra: resolve to survive. I think it's really important that we resolve to survive. That means that we do resolve some of the challenges that we have. One of the things I feel really strongly is that we live in a very divided society. We're being polarized. And that's why the skills and tools of mediation are very relevant, is how can we have the narrative, how can we have the narratives and the dialogue that help us to resolve those divisions and to survive, rather than find ourselves being divided and cancelling each other. And resolve to survive also means we've made up our minds. We've decided we are going to survive. Whatever crises get thrown at us, whatever conflicts and challenges, we are going to survive. So resolve to survive is the mantra that I'd like you all to be remembering as we go through this process. So here's how it all fits together. We'll go through each section and I will ask you to reflect on each of those sections in some breakout groups. And then we'll come back together and at the end of each section and see what our reflections are. And obviously you will have the slides at the end of today that you'll be able to reflect on as well. I'm sure Judy will share those with you. So starting first of all, before we go into breakout rooms, it's very important to start with the end in mind. So in fact, I've started with the end box here because what's really important is to say, what is our vision? What is the world we would like to see? What is the society would like to see? What we'd like that to look like for us as individuals, for us in the groups and family groups and communities that we belong to, and the global society. So just a few reflections, please, again in the chat box in what is your vision? Where are we going to? And what would you like the outcome to be, the world to look like? I know we can't live in utopia, but we can have a pretty good stab at creating something that is a better world than perhaps we're living in today. So what would the end result be? What are we looking to achieve? Working for community rewarded, Rowena, thank you very much. A happy, considerate world where people are aware and care. Tolerance, kindness, fairness, justice. Yes, thank you. Government systems, smaller government, greater community, nature at the forefront of decision making. So there's many things that we have a vision of, an interdependent, more community-based system with autonomous yet working towards a combined outcome. That's a wonderful vision, Katrina. Thank you. More compassionate societal systems. Actions that are conscious of people and planet. Absolutely. So starting with the end in mind is really important. And here we have some very clear visions that we'd like to create a fairer, more just world that balances people and planet and kindness and compassion too. And those are all things that I'm also working towards. So let's start with the first section. More kindness, far less division and divisive language, respect for community and planet. I agree, Louise. Thank you. So the first section here is anticipate, and that represented by the storm. Sometimes we see a storm, or sometimes a storm is upon us before we see it, but other times we anticipate a storm. I wrote yesterday about listening, but sometimes maybe when the birds go quiet or something happens, we have a sense that, and I know many people who are very sensitive, empathic people have sensed over the last few months and years that something's not quite right. And there is a sense that there is a storm brewing or that something is coming and you can't quite put your finger on that. So do we anticipate a storm sometimes? And when the storm happens, what are we going to do about it? Because we can then get thrown into confusion. One of the psychologists that I've worked with was called Al Siebert, sadly no longer with us, but he looked at human nature and he said that actually in times of crisis, people will, and I think we've seen this happen, deny danger, disbelief prevails over reality, and they seldom have plans. And one of the things we'll come back to today is, do you have a plan? And did you have a plan for when this storm might hit? And this is an interesting question, again, in terms of thinking about an outage or any other crisis that might impact us. What would your plan be? What would you go to? I always encourage my daughters to have a plan B anytime they were telling me of their vision for the future, getting into university, going to medical school, getting married, having a hot sunny day for their wedding. It's yes, but what's your plan B? What's your plan if it doesn't go according to plan? And so that's the most important thing to think about. And as Al Siebert said, sometimes our human nature encourages us to put our head in the sand. So here's the first question, and I'm going to ask Gina to just divide us up into breakout rooms. And I'd like you in those breakout rooms to just discuss for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back together. And I don't need a spokesperson. I'd just like you to just perhaps feedback some of the general things that you've been talking about. But think about, what are the big issues we're thinking about now? What are some of the crises? What is it that's happening now? What is the story or narrative? One of the challenges is we all have different stories and different narratives. And what are the negative outcomes? What do we fear most about the things that are either happening or that may be brewing? So that's the first question. Gina will pop us into breakout rooms and we'll come back together in 5 minutes. All right. So thank you very much for all participating. I was in a breakout room with Sandra, so I'll give you some feedback on that in a minute. But what were just an example? I don't need to go to each group, but just giving you some examples of some of the things you see as current crisis storms or things you're anticipating. What worries you most? What are the narratives you're seeing, and what do you see as negative about that? Anybody? Diane?
People not caring
Yeah.
covers all three individual stories, actually.
Yes, it does. Yeah, it just so, I mean, even if you go to the shops these days, doesn't it? You just find nobody's particularly interested in serving you. I feel, yeah. So
Being
lack of,
conscious of people's behaviour. If people were
yeah,
conscious of their behaviour, they might understand that it's not having a good effect, for example.
yes,
Nurses in hospitals, for example.
yeah, yes. I'm sure many people have experienced that. Anybody else got some examples of what you discussed, your thoughts in your separate rooms? No.
Notes in the chat, or do you want people to put their hand up?
Yeah, either. I mean, if people,
Yeah, I'm watching the chat. So.
No, I used to have people speaking, but I'll have a look in the chat if there are notes in the chat. I hadn't seen any. I can give you an example. So Sandra and I were talking about, again, the lack of consideration, but the lack of consideration in the natural world and to wildlife. We were also talking about people being locked up when people are in prison, or young people are in offender institutions, as well as being locked up and locked down as we were, the impact that has. And in particular, the impact that has on young people who are unable to then integrate back into society or school life. Judy, you mentioned Rowena. Rowena, where are you?
Yeah.
Did you want to say something?
I think we talked about young people being sort of cancelled out at university, whereby they might have said something that somebody didn't disagree with, which there's no middle ground to have a discussion. It's either you're in one camp or the other. You're not allowed to switch and have a discussion.
Yeah. Yes, I saw a very sad story recently with somebody who'd been excluded from his whole group of friends because he'd said or done something that displeased them, and they just literally cancelled him. And so traumatic. But this seems to be a mindset that we as society have adopted, that it's okay to cancel people and stop speaking to them, what we used to call sending people to Coventry, didn't we? Yeah, thank you, Rowena, for that. So the next part of the map and the next part of the process we're going to look at is analyze. As I say, this is the bit my clients don't want to do. They'd rather somebody else did the hard work for them. As you'll see, it says stuck in the mud, and on the map, and also this, so just to explain, my book, The Mole and the Mountain, is written about this map, and it's a parable of a mole's journey through this landscape. And this part on the map is called the murky swamp of reality. We've all been there, haven't we? The murky swamp of reality. And this is absolutely about reality testing. What is the reality of our situation? What is the brutal reality of our situation? Are we prepared to face up to that? Can we see what it is, and can we deal with that? My sense is, and it was a conversation I was having with someone yesterday, is that so many of us are either disconnected or distracted from what's actually going on, that we're not prepared to look deeply at what's going on. Either in society, impact something might have on us. What are these negative impacts? And what's actually going on for us? What are we thinking and feeling, and what impact is that having? And so this place of being in the murky swamp of reality is a very challenging place to be. I remember a time many years ago when my daughter was quite young, and we did go on a country walk, and she did fall into a bog, into the deep, murky swamp of reality. And, you know, when you are in a place of uncertainty, the temptation is to sort of get out as quickly as possible. So I remember her thrashing around and trying to get out of the murky swamp, when sometimes you need to settle, to just think, okay, where am I? What's happening? What are my options? How do I get out of here? I also had someone talking this week, which reminded me of either the bog or the fog, and it was about a pilot. And when a pilot is trying to fly his plane and maybe land in the fog, and he can no longer see out of his windscreen, he doesn't have any landmarks or anything, he's totally reliant on his instruments. But if the instruments fail, then you just don't know which way is up or which way is down. So being in the bog or being in the fog means being totally unclear, being able to get that clarity. And one of the things I'm talking through with my clients in the work that I do is, let's get clear. Let's understand this brutal reality, what's really going on, for us as individuals. And so I'm going to have a look at the next set of questions. Oh, this model also, I think, might help us with this question. This is a model I use very much in my conflict resolution. It comes from the Harvard Project on Negotiation, and it's called the PIN iceberg model. You can also use it for the bog, because what you're looking at is what's under the watermark. So the watermark is that top line. An iceberg, you only have 1/10 of it pops up above the surface, and underneath the surface is everything else. So in terms of thinking about what's going on under the surface of the bog, this is what Dr. Bernie Siegel was looking at with his patients. What's going on under the surface? We tend to look only at what's happening on the top, on the surface. What are our positions? What are our different narratives about something? You get someone arguing or taking an opposite position about global warming, for example, or any of the other issues. They take a different stance, a different narrative, a different position. But underneath the surface are all the things that matter to us, and why do they matter? So thinking about what are our interests, what are our needs, what are our hopes, what are our fears, what are our concerns, and where do we have some of those in common? When it gets down to us, most of us are concerned about our survival, and our security, our safety. And how can we marry those up? So that model may be helpful in helping you think through this next question. And here is the question to ask at this stage that we need to ask ourselves and also ask others. What is it that you do not know and need to explore? So when we're in a crisis, what is it that we don't know and need to explore? What further evidence might you need to gather? And what is yours and others' experience? And another E I'd add there is, what were your expectations? So here you might like to take a specific example of something that is a crisis or a challenge and think, what do we not know about this? What do we need? What are we perhaps assuming? What narrative have we adopted, but we don't know if it's right? Is there further evidence we could gather? Obviously, we get given a certain amount of information by mainstream media and others, but how do we explore more deeply? And how do we compare our experience and our expectations with those of others? So again, we'll drop into our breakout rooms again and have a chat about these three questions. We're back on. Brilliant. So what did that conversation throw up? Where do we need to dig deeper into some of these challenges and crises to help us really, really work out what's going on? Did you have something, Joanna, to share?
We were just talking about how there's a lot of information available, and we talked about sort of like searching out alternative ideas and actually doing even actually testing them ourselves. So if we have a it was Cher's example, she talked about having different, if there's something new that she wants to learn about. She talked about like looking at in lots of different places for that, getting the information from a range of sources and then testing it herself.
Yes.
And I was talking about, as you get into sort of like midlife, I guess, which is where I am, you can become quite set in your ideas, and you have to be quite active about keeping a curious mind. And personally I find that more and more challenging. It's very easy to fall back on what we know, and I don't know if that's laziness or just information overwhelm in today's society.
Really very helpful, Joanna. So thinking about where can we get some additional information that is a good resource, and realizing we may have got stuck in our mindsets and our ways. Sandra and I were talking about the fact that the lack of care and compassion again, and that sometimes we need to look at other people, and we specifically were talking about people who have been locked up in prison or whatever, and thinking there, but for the grace of God go I. They are no worse than I am, no better than them. I could, in certain circumstances, end up in those persons' shoes. And that was one thought we had. Anything else anybody else would like to add? Or Sandra, did you want to add to that at all?
No, I might be on mute. No, no, I think it was I think that we all ought to think more about, for the grace of God, that could be me, and that might make us more compassionate.
Yeah. So this keeps coming up, doesn't it? The lack of compassion and the lack of caring. All right. So let's have a look then. I'll go back to the slides and we'll move on quickly. There we go. So the next thing is adapting. What is it? How do we make a decision? What is it we need to Steve was just talking about how do you come up with solutions, and this is the next thing. So what are the options? What are the solutions? So this is the next phase, and we can think about this one quite quickly. I call this in my map the bridge of courage, because sometimes we need courage to come up with our own solutions. We may have been presented with a solution. We may have been presented with a narrative to start with, and then perhaps we're going to explore and see whether there are other thoughts about that, other evidence, other people with different ideas. And here we now need to think about, well, what possible solutions are there? We may have been presented with a solution by whoever, it could be someone in our family or someone we're in a group with. What other solutions, what possible solutions are there? Are there other suggestions? And I've put the word settle, but what do we need to resolve this? How do we move forward? And how do we look at all those? And one of the things you need when you're looking at solutions is to think about, and what criteria are there? How will we decide between those solutions? And that can lead us back to values as well. But this is the next question to think about, and we'll do this bit quickly so that we have plenty of time for discussion at the end. But just thinking about what possible solutions are there? What other suggestions can you make? And what do we need to resolve this situation? So let's pop into breakout rooms again. And this might be we'll see how much time we've got left, whether we have time for another breakout session. But thinking about how would we think about ways forward? And I liked Steve's idea about being curious and thinking outside the box. So yes, again, a brilliant discussion I've had with Sandra, but please share yours. You're thinking about how do you move it on? So I hope you can see the process beginning to unfold. First of all, you think about what are some of the crises that are either happening or might happen. How do we understand what the issues are there? Then how is it we could explore more deeply so we have a better understanding of the situation, of the impact on us and of other people? And then how do we move forward to think about, so what could we do about that? What are some of the solutions? What are some of the suggestions? And who might we make those suggestions to? If we're being offered a generic solution, how do we take those solutions and present them to other people? So some real challenges there. Anybody got some thoughts they're willing to share from the breakouts they were in that would be helpful? And as Gina says, these are the bits that will be captured on the tape. So it's very helpful to have this feedback as a summary of some of the conversations.
Does anybody want to speak? I'm looking for the gallery.
Diane,
Diane, yeah, go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, we had a good suggestion that both sides can start thinking from the other person's point of view.
Yes.
The person was talking about where, yeah, you take both up. That covers it. I haven't got
Yeah,
any.
yeah. And that's absolutely what that model that I showed you, you start to look at the other person's perspective, but also beneath the surface, not just what do they say that differs from me, but what are their needs, what are their interests, what are their hopes, what are their fears? You begin to look under the surface. In fact, in some of the workshops I do an exercise where I ask people to take completely opposite points of view on an issue that they'll feel strongly about, but then to use a form of words where they explore, and they end up finding, quite often they end up agreeing, but they also end up finding that they've got things in common, and that very often they're trying to get, go back to the vision, they're trying to get to the same place. They just have different understanding of what the problem is and how they might get there. So that's very helpful, Diane. Thank you. Anybody else willing to share? Sandra and I. Sandra, do you want to summarize? And then Steve's got his hand up. Did you?
Yes, I think where we ended up was in relation to the school system and the children. And we were saying that some schools are excellent, and it's usually the head teacher. Well, I suppose that's the person at the top, and everybody underneath follows that person and makes an excellent school. And we were saying, how can you can identify what makes an excellent head teacher, but what makes a poor head teacher, that then you get a poor school. So should we be looking more at where the good schools are? What can the poor schools learn from? Because our children are our future.
Yes. Excellent, Sandra. Thank you. And we've got Steve and then Rowena, please.
Okay, just briefly, what you said about the word perspective. I feel that's important because it's down to our perception of how we take on life's experiences, whatever there is. But if we can pause and have a better perspective on things, as you know, then we can apply looking at things better.
Differently. Absolutely.
Differently, yeah. Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you so much. Rowena.
I think we talked about looking at other skills, so maybe learning more skills, sharing your skills in a community, and asking in capital letters other people to help oneself or help one. I think it's, for me, it's always important. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I think we should use them in that ratio.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And certainly Sandra and I talked about how do we start small? You can only start where you are. I feel this is so true. You can only start with ourselves, and then we can start with a small group in our local community, and from there things can grow. So there are things that each of us can do to make a difference with whatever we see the challenges as being. Fabulous. Thank you so much. Well, I'll move on and share the slides. I think we may not have time for another breakout, but I'd certainly like us to end up with some more discussion and thinking about some practical actions that we can all take. So this next bit is then about action, and Steve, you will see here it is about taking a wider perspective, because where we're going is to the top of the mountain, and we call it the mountain top of experience. But all of us on our journey through life, but in fact, when we're trying to deal with a particular issue, we want to gain that wider perspective, and we have to climb up the mountain to do that. That's very challenging, actually. Whenever we climb the mountain, very few people that I know have climbed Everest. Not many people want to go with us when we climb to the top of a mountain, because it's hard work. It requires a bit of training, some new skills. You need a team to support you, and it's cold and hard work to get there. So we do find that if we are the ones who are climbing the mountain, getting to the top, gaining this wider perspective, being able to see things from a different point of view, maybe not so many people are going to want to come with us. I'm sure many of us on this call have experienced that. We may have felt that we were on a journey on our own, or with only a few people who could see what we could see. And how do we carry on when that's the case? But that's the journey, and when we get to the top, there is a much wider perspective. We can see things from a much wider view. And so this part of the journey is about seeing the whole what wisdom have we gained on the way, and how can we share that? And how do we then walk forward? What action can we take, and what action do we inspire others to take? This is very much about thinking of how do we inspire others to take some action to achieve that vision and help to resolve the problem that we've identified. Oh. So we can only focus on that individual journey. I was going to go back. I'd seen a perfect quote that I thought reminded me of what Steve had said recently. What was it? Can't find it now. Something that had come to me with it was a child. But the challenge in getting to the top is that we have to find our own path. So it is up to each of us as individuals to find our own path. And the challenge for us as individuals is letting other people find their own path. I'm sure many of us have seen something that we feel passionate about, and we've wanted to change other people's minds. We've wanted to tell them what our narrative is. We've wanted to persuade them that we're right and that they're wrong. And that isn't the way to be resilient. Unfortunately, the way is that we have to find our own path, and we have to enable others to find their own path. So this question here is about finding our own values. This is important for us to know what our individual values are, what the values of a group are, and maybe what the values we aspire to in society. Here are my values. They appear on the map, and they're the ones that I use every time when I'm mediating, and they are to listen, to learn, to love, and to laugh. And to listen means it's really important to hear what other people have to say before I tell them what I think, or maybe not even to tell them what I think, but to listen to other people. Where are they coming from? What are their thoughts? What are their feelings? To learn, to be prepared to learn more about the situation you're in. What's going on here? What else can we learn? To love means really what we've been talking about, to treat people with care, with courtesy and respect. How can we do that when we're in a crisis? I'm sure people in Spain and Portugal have found that there, were people who were prepared to trample other people down to get the food that they wanted, or the water that they thought they needed. In a crisis, people forget about these values. But if you can hang on to your values, even in a crisis, this is what helps us to be resilient. Resilience is about hanging on to those values and helping other people to hang on to those values. Otherwise, we just go back to dog eat dog and trampling on each other to get what we think we need. Laughter for me, you may have noticed this evening, is very important. I love to laugh. Humor and humility, I think, are really important. So in any crisis, we can find, and this in fact helps us to be resilient, we can find a way to laugh and share humor. I've made a video before, but some of you may remember the Chilean miners disaster, where some miners got stuck. I forget how many there were, but about 17 miners got stuck at the bottom of a mine shaft, and they survived for many, many days on very little food. But when they came up to the surface, one of the things they said that helped them survive was their foreman called Louis, who had a great sense of humor, and that they had managed to sing and laugh and so on. I'm sure it wasn't all laughter, but keeping that sense of humor going is one of the great tools of resilience. And so these, I think, finding your own values, this is just my set of values, but a set of values and principles. This again, I think you would probably find is the thing that helps in families, and in particular in schools. Those headmasters and those leaders that manage to lead others, they will have a very strong sense of values and some core principles that they apply. So these are the questions. Now, I'm not going to break this up because I think I'd like us to sort of think about more generally, what are some things that we generally can be doing, some actions that we can be taking, in particular thinking about, what would happen if we had a power outage? What are some of the things that we ought to be perhaps thinking about, some things that we could be doing? And I think a discussion about that would be helpful before I wrap up. So the next slides are about my wrap up, but maybe we think now about thinking about what are some of the actions that we could take. We've all talked about different crises. Sandra and I were talking in particular about young people and the crisis that they're in, and how some of them are becoming disengaged from society. What are some of the actions we can take there? But I'm also, with resilience in mind, thinking about what plans does anybody have for being able to survive as an individual, for a business that you're in, for your family, in terms of a crisis like the one that's just happened in Spain and Portugal? What things do you think you do? What plans do you already have in mind? So let's think about a little bit about actions there. I'll maybe stop sharing for the moment so I can see, and we'll come back to the slides just to
See
wrap up.
everybody then, yeah.
Yeah.
Gallery and see, maybe just people want to popcorn. I mean, I will just add in here that years ago bought somewhere with land.
Yes.
Aiming to be off the grid, not off the grid now, but that's the direction of own power, own water.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you can't do that in the center of a city. And I think we saw during COVID that people in blocks, tower blocks, who didn't have a garden and didn't have access to fresh air, that's a disadvantage. You've got to have a different resilience plan when you're inside an urban environment versus a garden or a big garden or a piece of land. So yeah, that's
having access to some land. It's one of the things I was thinking about, actually, Gina, when I thought about sort of Spain or Portugal. I thought, well, if you live there, it's different. But if you're on holiday, you've got no stored food, have you? You've got no water, you've got nothing, you know? And so, yes, we can have some plans, but what are our plans if we're on holiday? I've actually got, which is another thing, and it reminds me to maybe take it with me when I go in the summer. I've got a very small little gadget that you can filter water through, and you can put it in your suitcase, but you could actually take water from a stream and filter it through so you could get drinking water. And I just little things like that, you know, can you take enough dried food in your bags when you go on holiday? I think we just have to think about these things now. So I'd love to hear from other people what anything, you know, and it can be little things. Do you have enough cash to buy food from a supermarket that can't accept cards anymore? Katrina said, having support. Yes, Katrina, that is know who your support network are, I think is brilliant. I live in an unmade road. It was a farm track originally, now occupied with lots of houses. But we in lockdown started just a WhatsApp group that people can go onto anytime and say, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And I have thought of starting up a group to say, who's growing vegetables? Can we help each other and inspire each other to grow stuff? And we've also got some chickens. My chickens escaped today. My next door neighbor rang me and said they were in her front garden. So they're getting rather naughty and cheeky. And by the way, they're called Jessie, Peggy and Barbara. And they know their names and they know when they've been naughty too. You ever seen a chicken looking guilty? They know how to look guilty. And being prepared to give support, Diane. I agree. Yes. How do we give support? How do we offer support? Absolutely. Does anybody have any food stored? Do you store a little bit of food? Yes, Gina does. Water, somewhere to filter your water, some cash. Any other ideas? Having just some way of heating some food. Maybe you have a barbecue and you have an extra gas canister that you could use that to cook on.
bulk supply of toilet paper.
A supply of toilet paper. That takes me back to that beginning of March. The dash for
In the
toilet.
loft. It's in the loft.
I'm going to buy a wind-up radio. That's a good thought, Gillian. That would be great. Yes.
You mentioned actually, Jane, about having suggestions and it was interesting what you said about and who to present them to, because you can feel impotent. Like, why don't they do this? Why don't do that? Why don't they do that? Who to tell, who to share that with? Because that's an interesting thought. And I went to the AGM of the big employer here, Building Society. And I just felt I ought to be more informed. And it was an opportunity to be curious and hear beyond me in a meeting where they were going to present the whole year. So I took advantage of that. And I think being curious, as we've said, being informed, then if you have to share information, you might know a bit more, you know, being curious about your community.
Yeah. This is great. And I wonder if we might do, I don't know whether you do something like this, Judy, but a sort of information sheet. Norma's very well prepared, I see. She's got stored food, water and cash for 2 years. I don't know how much cash you need for 2 years. A lot, I would think, but so well done you. Water filter thingy, gas camping stove, pack for charging your phone. I heard from an American colleague, I joined his group thinking about this, and he said, never let your car run below probably half full with gas if you're not on the electric car, because then you've got enough gas to go. Say I wanted to go and visit my, say something happened and I wanted to go to my daughters. I thought I wanted to take food to them or go and help them with the children. And if the electricity was down, so would the gas station be. So how can we do that? So I think, doing it for 2 years. Oh, wonderful, Norma. Not enough cash for 2 years. That's absolutely brilliant. So I think all of these torches, wind-up radios, candles, for example, we got, I think about this sometimes and then it slips my mind, and we go back to that deny, danger, disbelief and not having a plan. And then something like this week happens and we come back, we think, actually, I need a plan. So does anybody have any final questions? And then I'm going to do a wrap up, and the time's gone really quickly, but you've been a brilliant group. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you for interacting, all your questions and thoughts. And I'm sure we could carry on. I'd have my own bank. Yes.
Like Dave. Dave got a bank. Remember the Bank of Dave, the movie?
Yeah.
Up here in Italy?
Yeah. I was listening to someone, actually, I forget who it was now, saying that we should start our own banks, and that actually if enough of us gathered together, it wouldn't be impossible. It's not an insignificant sum, but it's not an impossible sum that you need to start a bank. So
this is the kind of thing that the Stand in the Park movement have got behind, all these new ways of thinking of people power, of taking power into our own hands, supporting ourselves.
And I do think, this is quite important to think about. It's a big initiative again, but thinking about, skills exchange instead of cash, really how might we operate on a different level if we need to, but just even having that plan in our mind is something that we could come back to. So let me do a quick wrap up and then I can take any final thoughts or comments. So this was the final step. What do we need to walk forward, in particularly in groups and societies? What wisdom have you learned? I'd love to hear what wisdom you've gained from today, and how do we see the thing as a whole? So here's my final slides at a wrap up. The crowd is always wrong and only dead fish go with the flow. I always liked this particular saying. Here's an image that I have a cartoonist who works with me, and this is my quote: "Stay barefoot, fully human and free. There are hundreds of paths up the mountain, all lead." Oh, I've got to move people's things to people's things to be able to read it. All leading to the same place, so it doesn't matter which path you take. The only one wasting time is the one who runs around the mountain, telling everyone that his or her path is wrong. And there you can see a vision of the future and possibly where we are today, or looking at our phones and feeling miserable. But there is an alternative for sure. I'd like to finish with a poem. I know Judy's heard this poem. One of the people who's really inspired me is somebody called Dudley Weeks. He was, in fact, an international mediator working behind the scenes in countries that were in crisis. And he's talked about how can we dance? What if we could think about others, but what specifically if we could be the best version of ourselves? We can only start with ourselves, as I said, but if we do, how can we do that? And this is his poem to dance. If I had it all to do again, and we never have it all to do again, but if I did have it all to do again, I'd take much more time to dance. Dance, you say? Who needs ballet? Who needs to move and sway that way? That's not dancing, moving that way. When you celebrate each day, that's dancing, I say. When you dare to be you, that's when you dance. When you fall and get up, that's when you dance. When you can laugh at yourself, that's when you dance. When you enrich someone's life, then you have danced. For dancing is knowing that whatever place you're in can be made into a place where hope can begin. Dancing is reaching again and again for the best that's in you. That's dancing, my friend. So I invite you all to dance. I invite everybody to become a resolutionary. I will share with Judy. I'm going to be creating a very short course, not for commercial mediators, but to help people who would like to be these people who are resolutionaries, to inspire people to simply use this process, these skills, and in particular, the mindset of resilience in the crises and times that are coming up. This is my book, The Mole and the Mountain, which I call a parable for our time. And if you would like to do so, please contact me. Here are my contact details. And I also have a newsletter and I blog most days on LinkedIn. It's been an absolute pleasure.